Hey fourth graders, it's Mr. Sherwin. We're back here at math class. All right, well, we've just made it through our last module, module 3, and we're going to move on to module 4. So you get some new packets today. Yesterday you had your last quiz for that module. As I was speaking to your teachers yesterday, I heard that we had a lot of success, which is great. It's good news to hear, all right? That's a skill that you're going to need to know for a long time, for the rest of your life, basically. So get to know it. If you're still having trouble with it, keep practicing, okay? You practice at home makes it better, all right? All right, so we're going to move on today, and we're going to do start our next unit in geometry here, okay? So this here is our I can statement. Let's jump into it. It says, I can identify and draw points, lines, line segments, rays, and angles. Recognize them in various contexts and familiar figures. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these words that we just said, all right? Let me get a little pen out here. All right, identify means to label them, to know what they are when you see them, okay? You identify your parents out of a crowd, right? It's like, oh, there's mom and dad. So that's what you have, your identify. You can point out these things when you see them, all right? Draw means exactly that. You can draw them out with a pen or a pencil. So we're going to talk about points today, lines, line segments, rays, and angles. Some of these you may have heard of before. Some of you may have not. I know last year we touched on this a little bit, and you might be remembering that time when we talked about it, but it was a long time ago. So now we know recognize. Recognize is the same thing kind of as identify, as you're going to recognize these things in different ways when we see them in different ways on paper, okay? And you're going to and with familiar figures such as the figures that we just did in the previous page with a triangle and a rectangle and those types of shapes, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to stick with our I can statement. We're going to do a little bit of teaching, all right? So what I'd like you to do is make sure you've got a few things. Make sure you've got a pencil handy. Like I've got my pencil. I use a pen here because it's just easier to see on video. You're also going to need a straight edge, okay? This is a cool straight edge. Look, it's got all the alphabet here with the sign language. It was my wife's when she was a kid, and we still have it. It's kind of weird, but we have it. All right, so that's that. So you're just going to need this, not to measure with, but you're going to need it to draw straight lines today, all right? All right, the next thing we're going to need is for you to take your packet, and we're going to just tear off this top page, but we're not going to get rid of this page. We're going to use this page to learn these different, identify points, lines, line segments, rays, and angles, okay? So get yourself set with that. All right. Now, knowing that I've turned this over, let me just get this up out of the way a little bit. All right. Now, first thing we're going to start with is points. All right. A point is used when I want to identify a specific spot on a paper. Now, usually kids use an X, like X marks the spot. But that's not specific enough. All right. What we want to know is exactly where a point is. So what I want you to do is on your papers, let's just choose a spot, all right? If I zoom out here a little bit, kind of raise this up, and you can see my paper. I'm gonna choose, say, this spot right here. I'm just gonna put a point, just like that, right? You can see that, can't you? That little point, little dot? Cool. That's a good spot, all right? So I've got this dot right here, and so that's a point. That's a specific spot on a paper, all right? So what I want to do next is do another point, all right? To make another point. Remember, these are called points, right? Point and a point. Great. So these are points on there. So that's what we identify. So hopefully you can understand that. If you see a point, you can identify it. You say, hey, what is this thing called? You'll say, it's a point. All right, so you should have some dots on your paper that look similar to mine. All right, next thing we're going to do is take our straight edge. And I'm going to lay it down to make a nice straight line between the two, okay? So I'm going to get that there, kind of half them a little bit, and then draw a line to connect them. Mine's got a little chicane in it there, but we'll pretend that's straight. So you do the same. Good. Now, we need to label these points. We're going to label this point and label this point. And how do we label points? We label them with letters. So we're just going to choose the first two letters of the alphabet. We'll label them A and B. Right? So we identify this point as point A and this point as point B. Okay? All right, hopefully that's good. Now, we just connected these points with a line. So there's a definite starting point and an ending point. Okay? So what we do with this is called a line segment. Let me show you the thing again. This is called a line segment. Segment means a piece of a line. Like you could do, or a piece of anything really. Instead of saying, can I have a piece of pie? You could say, could I have a small segment of pie? Or that would mean not the whole thing, but just a small segment, a piece of it. So this is a line segment, it's a piece of it, all right? So how do we label lines like that? Lines like that, this would be, we would label this line here, AB, with a little line over it, like that. That's line AB. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. So we can also identify this line segment here as the opposite of that. We could say it's line BA. We could say it like that. You know, we could say it the opposite way, but it would be kind of odd if I'm saying it backwards like that. I like to say things from left to right, but you could still label it that way. All right. Now, what we want to do is we're going to draw another line. We're going to draw another point somewhere in our paper. All right. It shouldn't be, I don't want to locate it on this line. I'm just going to choose another spot. I'm going to choose, say, right here. Right, there's another point. Okay. So far, what have we learned? Points are little dots in papers like this. We learned that if a line starts and ends with a little point, we have a line segment. Okay. So good so far? Good. Now, we learned that we need to label our points. So guess what I'm going to label that one? Take a wild guess. That's right. I'm going to label it C. All right? We're going to label that guy C. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect the 2 points, but we're going to do this a little bit differently than you might think, okay? So I'm going to connect A and C, but I'm not going to do it with a line segment. Watch what I do here. Oh, let me use my ruler, my straight edge. Start here, okay, and do this. Now don't do this just yet. Look what I do first. There, I'm going to put an arrow there, an arrow there. So what I did is I connected these 2 lines, but I overshot them a little bit. See how I went past those lines? And I put an arrow, or these points, I'm sorry, and I put an arrow on either side, okay? Now this is not a line segment because it's not a piece of a line. It's actually just called a line. That's right, it's just called a line, all right? This would be called line AC, and what does that look like? This line over here would be called line AC or CA, and I put this line over it, but I'd have to put arrows on either end of that line because this is a line AC and these are line segments. See that? So what do those arrows mean? Those arrows mean that this line goes on forever and ever and ever this way, and this line goes on forever and ever and ever this way. Okay? So that's what a line is called. All right? So let's review. Little dots on a paper. What are they called again? Just shout it out if you know. That's right. If you said points, you're correct. It's a point. All right. A line that ends with points. What is that called again? All right. Hopefully you said line segment. It's a line segment. Okay? That's right. A line segment. So, because it's a piece of a line. Doesn't have arrows at the end, so it's a segment. All right? This is a real good learning time for you. If there's any time you're going to really be paying attention, it's right now. All right, so the next one is when we see this piece right here, this straight line that goes through the point and it has arrows on each side. Do you remember what that's called? Okay, if you do, if you said line, that's right. It's just a regular old line because it's not a piece. It represents the line that goes on and ever, forever and ever in those directions. Okay? So notice that it goes past the points, and that's really important to understand. All right, so give you a moment to catch that up. Ask any questions if you need to. All right. Okay, now let me get my papers ready here. Now we're going to make another point, okay? I'm going to make a point, say, right here. There. All right, now watch this, all right? Don't do anything yet. Just watch what I do, and then when I say to do it, you do it. So I'm going to start on this point, and then go right past it like this on this point. Oh, I forgot to label this point. What do you think I'm going to label that point? That's right, I'm going to label him D. Real creative over here, right? So what I just made here was this little line that started on B, went right through D with an arrow just on one end. Go ahead and draw that in. All right, good. Hope you drew it in. Now, this is called something special, okay? This here is called a ray. That's right. This here would be called ray BD. So I say BD, and it'd be called a ray. One arrow on the side. Now, I like this here. I remember learning this back when I was your age. I call it a ray because I think of like Star Wars and like a ray gun, you know, like a laser or something like that, or even just a science fiction novel, like pew, you know. It starts from a point and it goes on forever and ever, right? It just keeps going until it hits something, of course, right? So a ray just goes right through, goes on and ever in one direction, but it has a starting point. That's called a ray, and that's what this one is right here, rays. So we just learned about points, we learned about lines, we learned about line segments, we learned about rays. Next up is angles, okay? So an angle we're going to make another point. Let me make that point right here. So go ahead and write down your little point there. And we're going to label that point. I always forget to do that. So what are we going to label it, you think? That's right. If you said E, you'd be correct. Now what we're going to do is make another ray. We're going to make a BE ray. Okay, so we're going to start at B again. And then I'm going to connect that and go just past that a little bit. Draw a nice straight line. Go past it. Put a little arrow on the end. So we made another ray. This is ray BE. Okay, you see how that works? Right. And we can't call these, just so you know, I could not call this ray EB because it doesn't go in that direction. I want to call rays the direction that it's heading, okay? Starting point and goes on and on for that direction. So I couldn't reverse these, if that makes sense. All right, now that I've got two rays here, so here's the last thing. This is what we're going to call an angle, okay? An angle is when two rays start from the same point. Both start at point B, and they go off in different directions. What does that create? It creates an angle, just like that, okay? So it created an angle, and you can see that angle right there, okay? So it's really important to know that when you have two rays, both coming from the same point, but going in different directions, it creates an angle, that distance from right there to there, okay? Some of you might have seen this before. And you see this a lot in shapes. Like at the beginning of our class today, you saw like a triangle, all right? You saw a triangle. I mean, this would be a triangle. The reason why it's called a triangle, because look, it's got 3 angles in it, right? Just like that. And we label those angles. You see that with that arc right there? This would be angle DBE, right? That would be that kind of angle. All right, so that's super important that you would know, see how that works, okay? All right, so hopefully we're all caught up. So how would I write that out? Well, this, you know how we write this would be a ray like this. Over here would be a line segment because there's no arrows on it. This would be a line because there is arrows on it. And then an angle would look like this, DBE. We would just have a little like slanted L, and then DB, oops, I'm way off the page. There, D, little angle like that, DBE. See how that works? Cool. Well, we just learned everything on here. Let's review real quick. We learned that there's points, little dots on the paper. Cool. And we have to label those, usually with letters, okay? There are lines. Lines go through the point just a little bit and have arrows on either end. They go on forever and ever. That's a line, all right? A line segment connects 2 points in a straight line, but ends. Doesn't go past it, and doesn't have an arrow. That's a line segment. And remember, segment means piece, just a piece of it. Now, array, probably my favorite, is when it starts at an endpoint and it goes out and goes in one direction forever and ever. And goes through a point there as well, all right? When two rays start and go from the same point out in different directions, it creates an angle, all right? Okay, so that is our lesson today. Hopefully your picture looks somewhat similar to mine, and you had a good time using your ruler, all right? And what we're gonna do now is move on to our problem set, and we're gonna practice. Now I'm gonna walk you through this. We're gonna try to get through this as much as we can, okay? So hang tight, I'll be right back with our problem set.